I'm Jean-Christophe Guillaume, creative director for Prince of Persia 2. For 10 years, the Prince of Persia brand has been a defining benchmark for action-adventure gaming. So when we started imagining potential concepts for the sequel, we wanted to keep the best of the Sands of Time design, but also innovate to make the experience even more memorable. So, the concept behind Pop 2 relies on the same core values as all of the other Prince of Persia games. A very organic design that makes the experience highly immersive, outstanding controls and animations, and a mix of combat and exploration driven by an intense story. Indeed, in this genre, the player's experience is depending on the quality of the storytelling. Here, we want to put the player in a highly dramatic situation. His fate has been written, his fight is hopeless, he will die. That said, there will be a lot of unexpected developments as the game progresses. We've incorporated some special surprises guaranteed to throw gamers through a loop. To add to this drama and support this story, we also defined characters that we wanted to be absolutely memorable. For instance, players will fight enemies as diverse as the Thrall, a 20-foot giant, and a huge mythical animal called the Griffin. He'll also be hunted by the Dahaka, the Guardian of Time, that can't be defeated. As many enemies, as many gameplays was our motto. Gameplays in Pop 2 will be even more diverse than in the previous episodes. We put a lot of creative efforts into defining new enigmas, new traps, and other elements that will keep gamers on the edge of their seats with every new challenge. But the major change in terms of gameplay is certainly the brand new fighting system. The team has completely reworked the way fights are organized in Pop 2. The player will not only be able to perform new moves like grabs, decapitations, and strangulations, but he will also be able to create unique fight sequences by chaining a lot of basic moves together. We call it the free-form fighting system. Concretely, you will be able to start with a grab, and then decide whether you want to throw the enemy at another one, slice him, strangulate him, or stab a sword through his body. Another thing we introduced is the double sword combat gameplay. Pick any weapon dropped by your enemy and use it as a secondary weapon. You now have access to a series of new deadly moves with two weapons. Or you can utilize the new projectile aspect of freeform fighting and simply throw it at your enemy for maximum damage. We also wanted to give game players a new sense of power. The Prince is now acting with more strength and aggressivity. We paid special attention to the diversity and visual impact of the finishing moves. For instance, the double sword decapitation. For this move, we put a lot of effort into the richness of the animations, special effects like slow motion and camera angles to make it absolutely memorable. Eventually, we wanted combats in Pop 2 to be as acrobatic as the best cloak and dagger movies, so we used these references to create unique moves using the environment, like swinging around a pillar while slicing your enemies, stabbing your sword in a curtain and sliding down, or rebounding off walls towards your enemy. With all these new elements, we strongly believe the sequel we all imagined and hoped for is coming to fruition, and it will truly set new standards in the action genre, just like Prince of Persia Sands of Time did in 2003. Prince of Persia 2 will hit stores this November. Look for it.
I decided to get involved because I found the story interesting. There is something classic and something very original about it. For example, the prince is an archetype of Western fairy tales, and like in fairy tales, he wants to change his destiny. I like my character, Kailina, because she's very mysterious. She's very dangerous and intelligent, and she's fascinated by the prince because he wants to change his destiny, and she doesn't believe it is possible. She's also someone who's scared because she knows she's gonna die, and she knows her own destiny, so she's scared about it. What I like about her, that she's strong and courageous, and she's a fighter, and I think I'm a fighter too, some way. I've been always fascinated by the shadow side of life and people, and through my work I have the possibility to explore all that. It's a new experience for me, and of course I have to work hard. I need to work with a coach, because when I prepare a character in French or English, I have to work in a different way because I'm Italian. And what is challenging doing that is that when you record your voice for a video game, some way it's like if you give a soul to an animated body, and this is very funny. It's a special preparation because the only thing you have, the only thing you can use is your voice. So you need a good director to help you, because of course, you know, you don't have your body. You can use a body language. For an actor to use body language is the most important thing. So you have just your voice. So that's why I wanted to do it, because it's a completely new experience for me.
Since the beginning of the conception phase of Pop 2, our ambition has been to push the visual and graphic limits of the critically acclaimed The Sands of Time. The artistic direction and graphical treatment was one of the most prized features of The Sands of Time, and the massive challenge we face in Pop 2 will be to innovate and provide an even more exciting and unique graphical treatment. First, we started by defining the new emotion that we wanted the player to feel in Pop 2, namely fear and oppression. The player will play a prince that is cursed and that will have to face his own destiny, his own death. In this respect, the artistic direction took on a more mature and darker treatment. Visually, I wanted to place the emphasis on a realistic treatment in order for the players to be totally captivated by the game. In order to immerse the player in the game, we had to focus on color, light, textures, and detail in a unique and very specific way. I love the use of a monochromatic palette. It helped us to build the consistency throughout the game levels. It also helped us to provide emotions and also subtly put forward the key gameplay and plot elements. Each place in the game has a unique and dramatic mood and atmosphere that will help the player to orient himself. A game like Prince of Persia 2 allows each artist in our team to express themselves in very diverse universes. The player will explore a lot of various places, but they will first and foremost travel in different time periods, the past and the present. As for the characters, we had two challenges. First, we had to give the prince a new charisma, an attitude corresponding to his new combat abilities, with one constraint though: make him consistent with the Prince of the Sands of Time. We eventually made him evolve. Our new prince is a more mature character, darker, and always ready for a fight. He's now a real warrior, very self-confident, but also marked by fate. He is cursed by what is hunting him, by a death he knows can't be avoided. We wanted his armor to reflect this new orientation, with leather armor close to his body that would both protect him and also allow him to perform masterful acrobatic moves. The player will feel this character's rage, a certain violence in his attacks, and an enormous determination to face his destiny. As for the enemies, we wanted them to reflect this new direction of the game. We wanted them to appear fierce and frightening, and show attitudes and moves as distinctive as possible. As artistic director, I helped to unify the vision of the team to make one of the most visually stunning games of 2004.
There is a huge exchange of ideas between video games and cinema. Films often get inspiration from certain game-like elements, and games have come to use Hollywood-style production and storytelling to try and achieve the same emotional impact that only film could. But as filmmaking went through a creative calm patch, video games were growing up. This new maturity comes from teams like this one. We are in Montreal in the studios of Ubisoft, where around 100 people have been working on Prince of Persia, Warrior Within for over a year now. For the sequel to Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, Ubisoft Montreal has chosen a darker, even more cinematic approach.
We wanted to focus on the main character, the prince. Why and how he has changed. He's very different from the prince we met in the Sands of Time. The head animator of Belleville Rendezvous, Hugh Martel, helped us out. Starting with the storyboards, Hugh and I worked on sketching the environments, and together with Raphael Lacoste, the artistic director, we decided to hire actors to film live-action sequences. We rented a studio with friends from the Two Worlds Theater. It's not really a proper studio, but there was enough space to work in. Obviously, 2 days of filming is really short. It was all organized at the last minute. I called some actor friends from the theater, and there were 2 cameramen with mini DV cams. We put them on roller skates to get the traveling shots done quicker. We only had 2 days to get 15 minutes of footage finished. There was no lighting, no crew. We took the camera and decided the shots on the spot, keeping our drawings in mind as a guideline, but there were just the actors on stage. No scenery, just a few costumes and basic props. A wooden sword, a cape. It helped us keep the speed up, get the shots quickly with the actor, and keep a certain spontaneity. That's what I really wanted. So when the animation team started working on the project, they had visual inspiration for the movements and emotions they had to represent. The direction of the project came from those videos. They became our reference videos. Filming live takes a few seconds, but doing the same thing in animation can take weeks. So when you tell an animator, that's not bad, but I don't think the character has the emotion I was looking for, it's not because he's doing a bad job.
Although a computer is an excellent way of doing calculations, it's not the animator's fault that a simple camcorder can often be more helpful when experimenting with ideas. The cutscenes in Prince of Persia, Warrior Within, have a very cinematic feel to them. Hardly surprising, you might say, as they're called cinematic scenes. But even the sound effects have been approached in the same way, created as a Foley track, meaning live and not with a computer.
For the sound effects, we were looking for more visceral sounds, like bones cracking or guts exploding. It's a lot bloodier. When the prince slashes through his enemies, you really have to hear it. We had a specialist come in for all the cracking sounds, the sword slashes, the blood spurting, all that was done in Foley. He brought his own kit, like dry pasta for breaking bones. For the sound of slicing enemies into a million pieces, we had oranges, grapefruits, and cabbages to cut. We used all sorts of stuff like that for those sounds. It made them more sharp, more real.
So, as we're talking about cinema, let's get to the bottom of it. Give us some names.
There aren't hundreds of influences for Prince of Persia Warrior Within, but they are all carefully thought through, carefully selected and used. I think that the team's basic ideas came from swashbuckling films or Hong Kong movies with lots of action, and the hero using his environment in amazing ways. In Hong Kong movies, they are always bouncing back from a wall, grabbing a baton, and decapitating the guy opposite. From very early on, there was a desire to extend the swashbuckling feel to other parts of the game, such as the conversations between the prince and the enemies, with them taunting each other and stuff like that, a bit like in the films.
The player is introduced to each level by means of a long continuous shot showing the various interactive elements of the decor, not unlike films featuring another fan of action.
Jackie Chan is obviously a major inspiration. Initially, we wondered whether the prince should even have a main weapon. We wanted him to be able to fight with his hands, picking up weapons as he goes. Then we thought that we didn't want him to actually become Jackie Chan. He's the Prince of Persia, a hardened warrior who is never without his sword, and knows how to use other weapons too. We also wanted to give the player a sense of freedom. So we created different ways of interacting with the environment that are very much inspired by Jackie Chan. Like all the swinging around pillars, the way he can attack whilst running along a wall, project himself off walls. Or the way the prince can grab his enemies and throw them or do different attacks on them.
But there are more than just Hong Kong movie influences in the game, especially if you study the look of it.
Obviously, The Lord of the Rings is the biggest film of the last 3 years, and graphically, a very big inspiration, whether it's for the colors or the characters.
The Prince of Persia series always liked films. The original creator, Jordan Mechner, is sort of a game designer, scriptwriter, and documentary maker all rolled into one. Prince of Persia was one of the first games to include cinematic cutscenes.
The presentation of Prince of Persia 1 was really inspired by silent movies. You know, in the days before movies had dialogue and sound, you know, they told the story with title cards and in very simple vignettes. I really tried to tell the story of the game like a silent movie with little cutscenes after certain levels that would advance the action.
This clip is taken from an interview conducted in Montreal in 2003 when the making of Sands of Time was filmed. But now, for Warrior Within, no sign of Jordan Mechner.
When Jordan isn't in Montreal, he's in Los Angeles, writing the screenplay for a live-action Disney film, backed by Jerry Bruckheimer.
Jerry Bruckheimer. It's okay, everyone makes the same mistake. He's the producer of The Rock, of course. But let's rather have a look at the story of the game, which is far removed from a Whoopi Goldberg comedy.
In the previous game, the prince was able to turn back and alter time at certain points. He can completely change his destiny by traveling back in time, doing the biggest rewind in history. But we're not supposed to change our destiny, and the prince's actions have unleashed the Dahaka, the guardian of time, determined to eliminate all temporal paradoxes. The prince is a paradox, considering the events that took place. He shouldn't exist. By opening the sands of time, he has corrupted the timeline and must die. The prince has the crazy idea of going to the island of time where the sands of time were created, hoping to travel back to before their creation. So that's an interesting element. The prince travels back in time, and that allows us to flesh out the unexplained mythology from the sands of time, like the creation of the sands, where they come from, why, how, etc. It complements and completes the first game.
To put up with a character that's cursed, hunted, let's face it, he's doomed. The game had to look right, too. Judge for yourself what he's done.
It was a team decision to do something a bit different, a change of style from the Sands of Time. We realized that the initial character was two Arabian Nights, two nights actually. So we really wanted a marked difference this time. We'd all worked on the first game. We didn't want to do the same thing twice. So we said, let's do a real sequel, part 2, not part 1.5. But how? So we asked ourselves, what's happened to him since last time? Look at the story from the character's point of view. He has, after all, made a monumental blunder. When he opens the Sands of Time, everyone he holds dear dies under his eyes. He manages to more or less repair things in the end. But it doesn't end there. That's why it's an interesting license. With each new game, we add a little more to the saga. To be honest, though, by the end of the Prince of Persia Sands of Time project, we didn't know that Prince of Persia Warrior Within would continue the story.
So, the new Prince's look went through a few changes, and a few hybrid princes were tried out. Let's have a look at a few of them.
This design on the left was part of a series that was supposed to help make our prince better than the previous one. Apart from his really determined-looking posture, and the fact that he's bigger, more muscled. It's still very reminiscent of the previous prince. Nothing really like the new prince that was perfected over several months. The evolution of the character came slowly, and this sort of design made us realize that we had to take things a lot farther.
The development stage of the character is what filmmakers call pre-production. It went pretty quickly on Warrior Within, as the whole game took just a year to develop, even if many different ideas were tried out.
It's as diverse as other games, which are a lot more open, with you roaming freely in the deserts on horseback, and objectives that are less clear. Rather than finding yourself in a strange world after having died, a bit more mystic than visiting the 7 wonders of the world or finding the elements of time hidden in different parts of a garden. But we knew that we'd left ourselves some possibilities open with the final majestic twist of the Sands of Time. We could come back to the story and use it to continue developing a very particular side of the character. Darker, more mature, more determined.
And to get a result like this, the Ubisoft Montreal team looked to the movie world again.
Lots of the character's traits and motivation became clear later on, especially when we brought a couple of special agents on board, Hollywood scriptwriters that we worked with. We flew them into Montreal, put them in with the production and creative teams, and one of them, Corey, stayed on a really long time, working with the teams on the story, working with the level designers, adjusting the character's profile, changing the dialogues, etc. The story and the adventure, the gameplay. After watching the scriptwriters at work, we realized that they were really the best people to write the story. Professionals. In Hollywood, there are a lot of talented people who can write a story better than a game designer. We always thought the game designers could write stories perfectly well. We were wrong. It's interesting what we tried to do with the writers, working on an emotional curve that has an impact on the game scenario and the gameplay, but also making sure that the player's actions are respected. We tried to create moments of suspense, dramatic moments.
To make sure the look of the game evolved in the right direction, the studio decided very early on to call in a group of artists. Their preparatory work was the basis for the dark Prince of Persia.
Above all, he added his own unique style, his special touch. Thanks, Patrick. How was Nicholas? Thanks, Bruno. Goodbye, Patrick. Let's meet the artists. This is Nicholas, who worked on a lot of the environments and quite a few characters. A whole load of environments and a bit on the marketing. In fact, he added his own touch to the prince. All the marketing drawings are his. From the very beginning, there were 3 or 4 full-time illustrators on the project, which was great for us and for them. It allowed me to explain to our 3D modelers very early on what I was looking for. We didn't start off in 5 different directions, for example. We never said, let's try out this style and this style. We knew we wanted something a bit Gothic, something with instant visual strength, something epic. And all these elements come from our various personalities. Michael Labat, the artistic director, already had a personality that helped him really understand these influences, and that contributed to what the game is today.
Even if Prince of Persia Warrior Within is much more Gothic, the prince himself is the main focus of this shift in style. Pursued by the Daharka and seems much like something out of Alien, the prince has changed. Reprieved from death, he looks like he has stepped out of a nightmare or an asylum.
The prince himself is very dark, very strongly outlined, highlighted by his willful character. We gave him leather straps that bite into him a bit, really have him tightly bound in leather. That's what gives him his character, this extreme darkness that comes from certain nasty events in the past. All that gives a real atmosphere that is miles away from the adventurous explorer prince in the previous episode.
With all these changes, this 5th installment in the Prince of Persia saga still remains astonishingly close to its 15-year-old relative.
In my opinion, the 3 major strengths of the license have been there since the very first release in 1989. First, there's the animated cut pieces that tell the story. Prince of Persia 1 was the first game to have cutscenes, or perhaps it was Karateka, but it's the same guy anyway. Then there's the character animation, and lastly, the level design. I'd have to add that there's also an intensity, despite the simplicity of the combat. I don't know if you remember, but in Prince of Persia 1 there were, what, 2 movements? It was block and attack, block and attack. You had 3 life points, with only 2 left and 1. You had to time your attack just right, otherwise it wouldn't work. It was easy to play, but so intense that people still remember it. More blood, more fast action, a gameplay that's even more than before, and a lot more combos.
The combat system from Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, which game players and even the development team found a little repetitive, has been completely rethought. The new version is based on a free-form fighting interface, leaving the player unimaginable freedom during combat.
The strong points of Sands of Time is the free-form fighting. This system of fighting that gives enormous freedom to the player. We know it already, acrobatics during combat, using traps, using 2 weapons. The prince will be able to pick up loads of weapons during the game. Beyond that, the time powers are also back.
The rewind, or the way the prince can go back in time, was one of the biggest new features of Prince of Persia Sands of Time. But even if the all-new combat system is undoubtedly one of the stars of the sequel, the rewind is still one of the game's strong points.
And the other powers are really linked to the combat system in order to make them stronger and more useful in a fight. In the Sands of Time, you could use them, but it wasn't strictly essential. In Warrior Within, there are situations where you don't have much choice. For the slow motion, slowing down time, the difference with the Sands of Time is that the prince isn't affected.
Strangely, with all these new special effects and a look that is nothing like the original Arabian Nights atmosphere, Warrior Within is probably closer to the very first Prince of Persia than Sands of Time was.
As for the traps, for a while we wanted to go back to the very first Prince of Persia and make the traps lethal. We couldn't really do it though because the gameplay has a series of traps that requires acrobatics. We had long discussions with John Christophe, and I would have loved traps that cut you in half, but we couldn't really. It would have been too frustrating for the player.
C'était vraiment trop frustrant pour le joueur.
So we made them more deadly, but not absolutely lethal, and we tried to create combinations of traps that are much more dangerous.
Level design is really the art of making something challenging out of the environments created by the programmers. In other words, the level designer adds the traps, the puzzles, the enemies, and makes sure that the level is still playable.
The level design was pretty good in Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, but in Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, it's mind-blowing. We kept 3 out of the original 4-person team. These guys live and breathe Prince of Persia. And all they could think about was, look, in Prince of Persia: Warrior Within, we are going to make the levels absolutely amazing.
And they did it. The prince is able to go back thousands of years back in the past, which means there are 2 versions of the levels, past and present, which didn't lighten the workload of the level designers one bit.
If you want to create a gameplay environment based in 2 eras, you start by destroying it, as the passing of time would. So that's what we did. We built a level based in the past, when it had been built. Then once we had worked out the gameplay, the rhythm, and a real sense of atmosphere, we started demolishing it. We take a wrecking ball to the level and find another way to go through it. We have to understand that hundreds, even thousands of years have passed between the 2 eras. So we really had a lot of scope to destroy the environment. If I had to choose which version of the level is easier to do, I'd have to say the destructed one. Because we can easily justify holes or blocks of stone that help the prince get to trees or reach a part of the decor which were unattainable in the built-up version.
By the way, Ubisoft Studios have a playtest area where the programmers and above all the level designers have their levels tested by gamers like you and I.
We already had the Sands of Time as a reference, so we tried to add in even more things. We really wanted to keep the rhythm up. We've really made a sequel that can stand by itself. It's a totally different game. I hope that everyone has managed to feel at ease, to get inside the game. I've been working in video games for 9 years now, and I've never had such a talented team.
A talented team, a cinematic style, and a healthy budget for what can be called one of the biggest small-screen productions of late 2004. So the producers decided to treat themselves to a few big names like Monica Bellucci, who lends her vocal talents to the game, and the American hard rock band Godsmack.
When we researched the music for the project, there were several groups that we used as references for the new direction we wanted for the combats, the action scenes. That's when we came across Godsmack. It was great for both of us. The guys from the group were really happy, and so were we.
So there you go. That's the end of this making of. Ubisoft did ask us, however, to keep some of the biggest new features of the game a secret. So I can't really tell you about the numerous chests around the levels containing all sorts of weapons, the artworks to unlock, or the bonus costumes for the prince. And I definitely can't mention the alternative ending and all the rest. So the only way to discover everything is to get playing.